Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome back an old friend of the channel, and that's Jimmy Song. I think last time you were on, Jimmy, we were talking about SegWit and chain splits back in 2017. So a lot has changed since then. We're going to talk about all the latest and upcoming developments for Bitcoin, sound money versus the payment system side of things. You've been at a conference recently. Privacy is a huge topic, so a lot to get through today. So thanks for joining us, Jimmy.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about all of those things.
And we're going to touch on Carnivory at the end as well, for those of you that want something extra. But yeah, where should we start this conversation? I mean, people are realizing the importance of a hard money. That is probably the most broadly discussed thing about Bitcoin these days. Now, some people are saying that it's failed as a payment system, but I'm in the camp that the world needs sound money now more than ever, with negative interest rates, failed banking system, printing money. Yesterday we got the news that Hong Kong are going to give all their citizens $10,000. So we're now entering this world of helicopter money, modern monetary theory. So yeah, how do you see Bitcoin in that payments versus digital gold argument?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of competition for payments. Everybody wants to be a rent seeker. And if you're a payments company, you are rent seeking. If you think about Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Octopus Card, or M-Pesa, or whatever, all of those companies that process a large volume of transactions, they get to take a cut. They get to take a little bit of a percentage. And if you know anything about these systems, like even from the moment that you pay with your credit card to the point where the bank gets your takes your money and pays the vendor and everything, there are like 6 to 8 different intermediaries that all get some portion of the money.
Oh, you're right.
As a result, as a result of basically rent seeking off of that thing. So payments are like there's a lot of competition out there because there's a decent amount of money to be made, and Bitcoin doesn't really compete in that area, except possibly darknet markets and probably international remittances. It really doesn't compete in the payments arena. Whereas store of value, that Bitcoin stands heads and shoulders above everybody else. You really only have 2 other options, maybe 3 if you count gold. You have real estate, which has been going up everywhere in the world, and stocks, which has also been going up everywhere in the world. But the reason that those 2 assets have been going up is because of the helicopter money, right? Because of all the money printing that's been going on. And we tend to think of it as a more recent phenomenon. But if you actually look at monetary history since, say, like 1959, the monetary expansion has been insane for the last 60 odd years. If you look at the M2 money supply in the United States, 1959, it was somewhere around $286 billion. That was all of the M2 money supply that existed of US dollars in the world. What is it right now? It's around 15 trillion. So if you annualize that, so it's increased by 51x. If you annualize that, that ends up being roughly about 6.7, 6.8% per year. Now, stocks and real estate, those things have been going up also. If you look at the Dow Jones Index from 1959 to now, that's pretty much the bellwether, at least in the United States. How has it done over the last 60 years? It's been 6.8%. Real estate, it's a bit less. I think around the world it tends to be around 5%. But you're also getting utility out of it because you don't have to pay rent. So it ends up being that those are good stores of value. Pretty much everything else is not. But the thing about those 2 things is that they are extremely difficult to research and find the right things on. If you bought a house in Detroit 20 years ago, you're not doing very well right now. But if you bought a house in, say, Austin or something like that, you would be doing very well. But it requires a lot of research. You have to figure out the neighborhood and how close it is to the highway and things like that. Similar thing with stocks. If you know anyone rich that invests in stocks, they spend an inordinate amount of time researching and figuring out what, like subscribing to different reports and reading for hours on the internet and forums and whisper numbers and all this other stuff in order to invest. Bitcoin is so much more fair than either of those things, right? You could be somebody in Bangladesh and you could go buy the same Bitcoin that a Silicon Valley insider with the best deal flow gets. And in that way, it's a lot more fair. So it's competing against two rather not very satisfactory options that are gated in many ways and require a ton of research. Bitcoin, once you understand it, you don't have to research it again. So it's much better for that reason.
Absolutely. And yeah, we've done videos on this, the truth about inflation and why people are falling behind. Those stats, as you say, it's just a reflection of that 7 or 8% monetary growth. And even investing in stocks and property, you feel like you're doing well, but that's probably because relatively so many people are falling behind and all that wealth is being accumulated at the top. Then we've got that wealth effect, the cancel-on effect, those that get to spend it first, get the most out of it, this, that, and the other. So for the first time in history, we have a system that's very easy to onboard at the click of a button. We now have smartphone penetration in a lot of these countries. People have an option where they're not going to get punished for trying to save money. So I think that argument and that discussion's been had a lot of times now. So let's get into the technology and the progression of Bitcoin, because once we know that we have this sound money, people are saying, well, do we need a payments network as well? And as you say, it hasn't actually failed as a payments network for remittances and large value transactions. It's actually the best system in the world for that still. So it's all a scale of can we get really good at micropayments and other things. So what are the technologies that are coming along? We're discussing Schnorr, Taproot, Dandelion. These things are good for privacy and good for scaling. So yeah, share your thoughts on all of those.
Well, so the big one for payments, I think, is the Lightning Network and some of the stuff that's coming out of there with L2 and other things like that, that they make it a lot more liquid than it currently is. So the way the Lightning Network works is that it's built on a bunch of payment channels, and channels are sort of the backbone of the Lightning Network. They're the edges in the graph of the Lightning Network, essentially. The only thing about that is it's hard to get inbound liquidity. And by that, I mean, if you want somebody to be able to pay you for some good or service, you need inbound liquidity in order to accept payments on the Lightning Network. Unfortunately, not the way the Lightning Network works is that if you want 0.5 Bitcoin in inbound liquidity, somebody else has to lock up 0.5 of their Bitcoin in order to make that possible. And most people aren't willing to do that. And we have a term for that in the fiat world. It's called a line of credit, right? Like no one wants to necessarily give you a line of credit. I mean, mutually, maybe if you open 0.5 to me, I'll open 0.5 to you, something like that. That might work. But generally, it tends to restrict some of the liquidity on the Lightning Network. So what L2 does is it allows, instead of a one-on-one payment channel, so instead of me opening a direct channel just with you, you can have a channel that's multi-party. So you can have 4 or 5 different parties. And a single inbound of 0.5 is available to all of the other participants in the L2 channel. So it makes it a lot more liquid. It requires a little more coordination, but you kind of need a lot of coordination in Lightning anyway. So this is a pretty promising technology in that regard. There are more privacy things too, but with respect to Lightning. But the main things I think on Lightning are the method of payment stuff.
The other things I've read about with the Lightning Network as well, things like smart routing. So we're going to find our way to someone else on the other side of the world if I don't have a direct channel open to them. The other thing was if I want to send you $1,000, but there are people that have that channel capacity, like we just spoke about, we might have 5 people that have a $200 capacity, and we can break that payment up and it gets to its destination. So these problems are being solved because Lightning saw really big growth and then it tapered off a bit. That's probably a symptom of crypto in general and sentiment and new users coming in. But I definitely don't think it's failed yet. And there are solutions to solve a lot of these problems, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, routing in particular is an interesting whole thing because you need to know about other channels in order to be able to route. There's something called trampoline routing, which is becoming more popular, which is you outsource the routing to some other node that knows more about the entire graph of the network, and then they can help you figure out like a good way to route payment from A to B or something like that. Now that requires a little more trust and so on. So it's not ideal. There's a paper that was published not too long ago on something called ant routing, which is more about preserving privacy along the Lightning route as opposed to minimizing the fees. Most routing algorithms right now optimize for minimizing fees, which kind of makes sense because if you're paying for coffee, you don't really care who knows about it. But this is the sort of tech that we need to explore and figure out, because these are not simple problems, and these are often very complex problems within graph theory and so on. And figuring out like a good way to route and to split payments and to make sure that no in-between nodes really get much information about the payment itself. These are the things that Lightning is actively being worked on.
Yeah, I had a friendly debate with an XRP maximalist the other day, and they were saying, they read a study where 80% of the nodes, or there's 10 nodes that have 80% of the capacity or whatnot. And I was saying, it's just early on. That's kind of a symptom of the way it is at the moment until these other solutions come in. The other thing they were saying is who's going to lock up that $1 million in a node? I think the yield was, $50 or something like that. The point was you can get a high interest rate yield, but it's kind of like, well, this is an expense. People that are passionate about this, it's not necessarily just to make money, it's to help develop the technology. And doing all this actually creates, indirect value for the Lightning Network and for the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but there's some technologies that are being built on top of Lightning right now, which are really exciting. So you can, for example, if you can find a route to another node, you can do end-to-end encrypted messaging through Lightning, which is super exciting. No, Telegram company that keeps all your logs or Slack or anything like that. You can. There are other reasons why people might want to go on Lightning, and if you have this ability to communicate and transfer value, I mean those are two huge wins. And who knows what sort of businesses can be built on like being able to do both of those things in some interesting way. But I mean this is what building it out kind of looks like. Right now it is kind of centralized. There was a paper which had Christian Decker as an author in it not too long ago about the centralization of the Lightning Network, and by almost every measure, it's probably too centralized. But this is in the early days, and most people are minimizing for fees and stuff like that. The routing isn't optimal for privacy, for example. So as more people demand, say, more privacy, you're not going to connect to the nodes with 80% of the capacity because they might be logging something. So you go around them and use other channels or other nodes that are better for privacy and so on. And I mean, this is the realm of the entrepreneur, where if you know that there's demand for more private Lightning transactions, you might want to run a node, like have some sort of policy about your node that you're not going to log certain things, and like spread them out and do interesting things so that there's more user privacy being preserved, especially with respect to messaging and so on. So being able to do that, those things are coming, and it's still very early days of the Lightning Network, and I suspect that it'll get better and better as it grows.
Absolutely, yeah. Private messaging, we've heard of gaming, little apps being built on top of Lightning, so it's not just that payment network. And the final thing I want to mention was, I think it's called Strike, where they've integrated Lightning payments, so you can actually pay a credit card invoice with the Lightning Network, and vice versa as well. If you need to actually pay a Lightning invoice, you can do that with your credit card, but you can also pay the credit card with a Lightning all through the app. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So Jack Mullers is working on that at Zap, but essentially he built it because of his parents' business. So his parents have a marijuana dispensary Denver, I think in the Colorado area, and basically they've been trying to get people to adopt Bitcoin because so many customers just come with cash because you can't use credit cards or anything, and they wanted to try to get people to use Lightning. Nobody installed could figure out how to get Bitcoins, let alone Lightning channels open and things like that. But then, Jack had this Olympus platform on Zap, so he decided to re-architect it significantly so that it would be, all they would have to do is enter their debit card. And now, they offer a 10% discount for anyone using a debit card that way. And they basically are their own bank, and it's a lot better than holding on to lots and lots of cash, and that's amazing for them. And this is sort of the use case it enables. It really literally banks the unbanked, and marijuana dispensaries in Colorado are certainly unbanked. But this is a killer app in my opinion, because if you are somebody in anywhere in the world, if you can bridge those two worlds between the banking world and the sort of the Lightning world. Now you can store all your value in Bitcoin. That's what people want to do anyway, especially the Bitcoin believers. And if I can sell my goods and services to anyone and get Bitcoin in return and not have to worry about any of the friction that exists in between, that's a huge win. And Strike, by the way, isn't the only vendor that's looking into this. There's another app called Escher, which I saw at the Advancing Bitcoin conference. They're working on it as well. But that seems to me the killer app, because instead of being a pure method of payment technology, this becomes a store of value technology, because it allows you to take payments from another system entirely.
Yeah, in Australia, the guys over at Living Room of Satoshi that let you pay all your bills with crypto, they've just got a financial services license, and they work closely with Travel by Bit that let you pay and book all your holidays and flights with Bitcoin and Lightning. So I'm sure something like that exciting is going to take off in Australia as well. Next up, I want to talk about Liquid, because this is something that isn't trying to get decentralized, really, is it? It is what it is. It's a payment channel between the exchanges and big businesses and corporations. Have you got any thoughts around that? Is that freeing up a fair bit of the load from the Bitcoin base chain? I've heard stats that some days it's like 70% of transactions are between exchanges or off exchanges. So is that going to free up a lot of the block space as well?
I mean, I'd like to see that, but basically, Liquid, the way it works is that it's a federated chain. So it's I think the federation is 15 members, and 11 of 15 of them have to sign off before something goes through. So it's a different model, and I would consider it centralized. But for that centralization, you get a lot of really interesting features. For example, you have confidential transactions. No one knows anything about the transactions that you do except you and your counterparty. And you can also issue new assets, and you can trade them atomically using the confidential assets and stuff like that. So no one knows the assets you're trading, how much you're trading of it, or anything like that. Which is very exciting. And they have, because it's controlled by the federation and there's no mining, you have very regularly spaced blocks, which makes it a lot more reliable. And that's what you get in exchange for the centralization that they have. If I were an exchange, this would be the fastest way to get things in and out from different exchanges. I don't think the capacity is really there yet. I've heard numbers like 300 Bitcoin locked up in the Liquid sidechain at the moment. That's not very much, but they have a decent amount of tether and so on. But during the next bull run, when fees are high on the main chain and so on, I suspect that this will get used a lot more, because just the user experience of getting credited on the Liquid sidechain, or using the Liquid sidechain very quickly from one exchange to another, is going to be a lot better for everybody than having it take forever.
Absolutely. And have we seen any tokens issued on Liquid yet? Any that you know of?
Well, I mean, I think Magical Crypto Conference, they issued a token for each of the characters and things like that. Okay. There's also Tether. Tether has a token issued that's equivalent to any other Tether. Yeah. I think the Tround Foundation put their tokens on there. So the value prop there is the exchange no longer has to run the Tron blockchain, which is, who knows what malware is in there. Instead, they just run Liquid, and the Tron Foundation backs it, so you can do it that way. I think BitC is doing something similar with their coin. So in a way, it should make exchanges' lives a lot easier if all of these assets had some equivalent on the Liquid sidechain, because now you don't have to run like 37 blockchains and expend engineering resources making sure that they're all updated and so on.
Cool. So that's a lot of the second layer stuff for people at home. So let's get in and talk about the base layer Bitcoin protocol upgrades that are coming. Where do you want to start here, Jimmy? We've got things that are good for privacy, but some of these are really good for scaling as well.
Yeah, I think Taproot's the big one that's coming up, and that's very, very exciting. So this is what you would call SegWit version 1, and it has within it a bunch of technologies, Taproot and Schnorr being the two big ones. But basically, between those two things, you get a lot of interesting properties that come out of it. So what Schnorr allows you to do is signature and pub key aggregation using something called Music. And this is from a paper that Blockstream released, I think, in 2017 or 2018, somewhere around there. But essentially right now, when you have multi-sig, when you have, say, 5 of 5, you need 5 signatures and 5 pub keys, and you match up each one and make sure that they all validate. With something like Music, what you can do is aggregate those 5 signatures to a single signature and aggregate those 5 pub keys to a single pub key. So not only do you save space, like 1 signature is a lot better than 5 and 1 pub key is a lot better than 5. But you also get a lot of privacy, because as far as the blockchain is concerned, it thinks it's 1 pub key and 1 signature. You have no idea if it was a multi-sig in the first place. So that's what Schnorr brings you, and that's very exciting. But on top of that, you have something called Taproot. Now, what Taproot does is we have 2 basic types of addresses on the Bitcoin network. We have pay to pub key hash or pay to witness pub key hash, and pay to script hash or pay to witness script hash. The first is a single pub key lock. So this is the vast majority of transactions. Somewhere around 95% of all Bitcoin transactions are locked to a single key. Anytime you're using a Trezor or something like that, unless you're using some weird multi-sig setup, you're using a single key, right? And that it's locked to a single key. It can get unlocked by that single key, and you can spend it by just using that single key. Now, that's fine for certain applications, but if you're locking up a lot of money, that tends to not work so well, because you have a single point of failure. And enter multi-sig. So this was there in the Bitcoin client at the beginning, but it wasn't very convenient, and it took up a lot of memory because of the UTXO requirements around multi-sig. But they created pay to script hash, and SegWit version is the pay to witness script hash. And it's a lot more flexible. Essentially, you can define specifically what conditions under which the Bitcoin can be spent. And it could be 2 keys, 5 keys, 7 keys, or lock time and 3 of these keys, something like that. And it's very, very flexible. And those are the 2 types out there on Bitcoin right now. What Taproot does is it combines those 2, so you can't tell which one is which. Right now, it's very easy to tell which ones are pay to script hash, which ones are pay to pub key hash. With Taproot, now you have no idea which one it is, and that's wonderful, because that means like you can't tell an exchange's accounts. Exchanges almost all use like multi-sig in some way, especially for the cold wallets, versus some Joe Schmo in Bangladesh or something like that. Like you have no idea what whose is what, and you're hiding more information, which is the essence of privacy.
Yeah. So for people at home, when you're setting up your Bitcoin wallet, you've got your public key, and that generates your public addresses. And then to send Bitcoin, you've got to sign that transaction with your private key. and that's a certain amount of data. So when we have to do a multi-sig transaction with those 5 keys that all have to sign it, that creates obviously 5 times more data. So once we have that, it can be aggregated down to 1. It saves a lot of space, but as Jimmy's talking about, it also creates private conditions because we don't know who those 5 people were. We don't know if there was other conditions around it, like a time lock, and that creates more security and privacy. So really cool that those features are coming. And the big one's probably exchanges. If BitMEX, for example, does all their withdrawals at the end of each day. If they have 1,000 withdrawals and they can aggregate that down to 1 signature, again, these things are just making Bitcoin so much more efficient without increasing the block size.
Yeah, well, they can't do the 1,000. If they have 1,000 inputs, they can't aggregate it to 1 signature just yet. That's probably SegWit v2, and that's something called cross-input signature aggregation, which would also be really, really good for scaling. But yeah, at the moment, it's mostly multi-sig. When you have like 3 or 5 or something like that, all 3 signatures can be combined, and you only have 1 signatures instead of 3. Or if it's like 11 of 11, you have 1 signature instead of 11.
So yeah, that 1,000's, sorry, I should have made that clear. That's not coming anytime soon. Maybe, 12, 24 months away, we can start to talk about those things. But I just want people at home to know that these things are possible. This is why there's no rush to just increase the block size like other people have done, because we ideally want to be able to do these 1,000-in-1 things in the next year or 2.
Yeah. So as a result of some of this stuff, block validation times also are somewhat less, because what you can do is you can take each transaction and take all of the signature and pub keys and validate them all at once instead of checking them individually. You can essentially add on both sides of the equation and validate it more quickly that way. So it requires less resources on the part of full nodes in order to run them, which is one of the big properties of decentralization. We want everyone to run their own full nodes so that they're master of the Bitcoin software that they're running. And that's coming more into prominence now, especially with like Bitcoin Cash and so on, who are now coming around to realizing, okay, maybe I need to run a full node.
And is there any estimates, Jimmy? Is this going to get lightweight enough where people could run a Bitcoin full node on a good smartphone in the next couple of years, or how do you see all that playing out?
So there is one smartphone where you can run a full node. It's called the Exodus phone by HTC.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of space, but the Bitcoin blockchain is still growing at a fast enough rate. I think it would be possible for most phones to run Bitcoin core software in pruned mode. It's just that no one's really built it. Pruned mode requires just the UTXO set, which I think is less than 10 gigabytes. So it's definitely doable on any phone. The only thing is it's, no one's written it yet, and it does require a lot of bandwidth to receive transactions and so on. There's something called U3XO, which is out of MIT Digital Currency Initiative. I think it was Taj Draja. He also wrote the original Lightning paper. He has some scheme where you don't have to even keep the pruned, the UTXO set. You keep a tree of the UTXO set, and it ends up being very, very thin. So you don't even have to have the full blockchain to be able to run a full node. And full node is different than archival node. Archival node is have the entire history of the blockchain. Full node is being able to validate everything that comes in, and those are they're not subsets of each other or mutually exclusive. They overlap significantly, but one's not necessarily the other. So that I think is possible, a couple years down the line. And I would love to have that for every wallet that exists. Like every light wallet should be able to run some sort of a full node using that technology. But this requires a lot of engineering and stuff that we haven't really explored thoroughly yet, but the paper itself is really exciting, and the ability to be able to run a full node on your phone may be a reality in a few years.
Yeah, and again, for people at home, I think it's just important for them to understand that a lot of these things they're done in theory. We just need the work to be done, or the code to be written, and time, and Bitcoin is going to improve a lot. The other one we haven't touched on yet is Dandelion. So for those of you at home, you want to picture a dandelion flower. Rather than me broadcasting my transaction to all the nodes around me and they propagate that around the Bitcoin network, we want to send it to 1, 2, up to 5 people before that person propagates it to the whole network, and then we don't know where it's come from originally. Or do you want to maybe describe that in your words, Jimmy, how that all works?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you've described it pretty well. The current model of transaction propagation is you just spread it to everybody that you know, and that's it. It's more like the bloom of a dandelion, basically. It's you spread it to everyone you know, but then if anyone is observing, they know that they heard it from you first, so they know that roughly what part of the world that the transaction originated and so on. So Dandelion is a way to preserve that privacy, and the way it works is that you transmit the transaction to somebody else, and with some probability, they act as if they're the ones that originated the transaction. So they basically flip a coin, and it's 80-20 coin, something like that. 80% of the time, they keep on the stem phase, so they transmit it to one other peer, and then and that's it. Or 20% of the time, they act like, hey, it's us. I'm going to spread it to everybody I know. And they do. And depending on how long the stem phase, it goes exponentially to 100% that it'll be spread. But after a certain amount of time, it'll bloom. And at that point, everyone will know about it. But a network observer won't necessarily know where it originated from. So, the problem with Dandelion is that there are some DDoS possibilities that you can use Dandelion for, and not all software is guaranteed to be enforcing the coin flip rule and things like that. And they may be actually observing and trying to figure out where it's from and so on. So, I think Suhas to our core developer, he wrote a pretty thorough analysis of why we don't want to integrate it into core just yet. And a lot of that has to do with some of the attack vectors that are available if we do implement it. So it's an exciting technology and a cool idea, but it's going to take some time.
That's one that sounds like it does need a bit more research. Mimble Wimble is the other one that Litecoin is talking about experimenting with. We've now seen a Mimble Wimble coin, which I found out today is the one that Trace Mayer has been pushing. So do you want to maybe talk about that technology and then why we need another coin called Mimble Wimble coin?
Well, we don't need that other coin. But yeah, basically Mimble Wimble is using something called confidential transactions, and from a cryptography perspective, it's something called Peterson commitments. But basically, it blinds everything. So you get a lot of privacy, and there's a theorem in cryptography. You can have perfectly blinding or perfectly binding. But you can't have both. Blinding means that you get perfect privacy. There's no information that leaks. And perfectly binding means that you know exactly how much of the asset that exists. So Bitcoin is perfectly bound to 21 million. Therefore, we're not going to have perfect privacy unless we're willing to change that, which I don't think people do. With Mimble Wimble, they've made the other trade-off. So they're perfectly blinding, so you don't get any leakage of information about the transaction, at least in the math. But it's not perfectly bound. There are ways to subvert it if any of the cryptography breaks. But that's a trade-off that they made, and they can make all sorts of efficiency gains by using cut-throughs and so on. The first two projects that created that were on Mimble Wimble are Beam and Grin, and they launched, I think, early last year, right around the 10th anniversary of Bitcoin, and neither of them have gained that much traction as far as I can tell. Mimble Wimble coin launched about 2 or 3 months ago. And essentially, they're a fork of Grin. The only real difference between Grin and Mimble Wimble coin is that it did a 50% airdrop. And it did a 50% airdrop to registered holders of Bitcoin. And Trace Mayer apparently was one of those people that actually registered. And we know that he's a Bitcoin whale. He's been accumulating since Bitcoin was 25 cents. So he has a lot of Bitcoin. And him being one of the big whales that actually registered, pretty much every other whale probably didn't care. He probably got a significant amount of the airdrop. I'm estimating in the millions of coins, and their coin is apparently capped at 20 million, and they did a 10 million coin airdrop. So he probably has millions of coins. So when he's going around and talking about Mimble Wimble coin, he's really trying to pump his own bags, right? And that's what he was doing at Unconfiscatable. He even came up to me and told me about this airdrop of Mimble Wimble coin. I didn't get to ask him much about it because I had to do the Scammy Awards. But he was clearly trying to show something. He had a piece of paper or a business card or something that he was handing out to people. But yeah, not a good look, Trace. And he's managed to burn down a reputation that he's spent 10 years building. And it's kind of a very sad story because, I mean, he was one of the more respected OGs just for having not fallen to scams, because so many old OGs have fallen for scams. It looks like Trace has also.
I would love to have him on and chat to him about it, why he's going down that path. Another couple of coins I wanted to ask you about was Handshake. So I do love the idea of human readable names, being able to send my coins to Jimmy Song, or you guys at home can send it to Nuggets News instead of that long, complicated alphanumeric address. But what are your thoughts on Handshake? Again, why do they need the coin in their own blockchain? I like the technology.
You don't need the coin, right? Like you could do the same auction style stuff with Bitcoin. The only reason they created the coin was to have some, print your own money essentially. The project is by JJ, and he used to work at Purse.io. I think he might still be working there, but he created the Bitcoin client, and this is a full JavaScript client of Bitcoin. So, it's got a bunch of things. But he launched Handshake as a way to do something like DNS, but in a decentralized manner. But I mean, if you look at how it's being done, it's anything but decentralized, right? They have various top-level domain equivalents that they're selling, and they decided to really have a release schedule every week for the next 52 weeks, something like that. And every week there's a bunch of them that get released, and you can bid on them using the Handshake token and so on. It just seems like all kind. I mean, I think I know that the value prop that they're trying to give to people, it's a decentralized DNS that's not controlled by ICANN and so on. But at the same time, it's still pretty centralized. They're the ones that hold it. I will say that if you are a developer and you have a GitHub account with more than 15 followers as of February 4th, you can get some of those Handshake tokens for free. So you should go and claim them and sell them for Bitcoin, because that coin has rapidly declined in price pretty much since its inception. But you can go claim it. I'm not happy with how they did it. If you really want to decentralize DNS, you could do it as a sidechain of Bitcoin or something like that, and just use Bitcoin and not have to create your own token.
Okay, cool. I think that's just about everything I want to speak about today, Jimmy. Let's talk about the Bitcoin Cash possible chain split coming up here. We heard that they might be incorporating a sort of miner's tax for future developments. What's the key dates coming up for that? I did reach out to Roger Ver, and he said that, it's not good. He kind of wants to stay out of it because he doesn't see a solution or which side he should be on. But what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so apparently it's going to come to a head on May 15th. That's the next hard fork date for Bitcoin Cash. The actual tax is called the Infrastructure Funding Plan, and this was a proposal put out by 4 mining conglomerates, BTC.top, Via BTC, Bitmain, or Ampool, and Bitcoin.com, of which Roger was a signatory. The thing about Roger is that he was supporting the infrastructure funding plan for the first 4 days, and then like our BTC was going crazy and saying like, what, how could you do this, blah, blah, blah. And then he suddenly turns around and says, yeah, I didn't mean to sign that, or they released it too early or something. So he's being very deceitful about it. But regardless, the two main clients of Bitcoin Cash are Bitcoin ABC, which is run by Amory Sachet, and Bitcoin Unlimited, which is run by Peter Risen. Amory Sachet is in favor of the infrastructure funding plan, which currently is now 5% of every block subsidy, which in Bitcoin Cash, as of May 15th, will be 6.25 BCH, divided by 20. I guess it's whatever that is, 3.0.
I think their halving date is like a month before. I'm pretty sure it's in April, but anyway.
Yeah, it is, and it's post their halving in order to make it, I guess, more palatable or something. But 5% is going to fund one of four projects. I think Bitcoin ABC is one of them, BCHD, which is a fork of BTCD, I think, and a couple of others. But basically, Peter Risen does not like the idea at all because, first of all, his project isn't included as one of them. And also, it's basically a dev tax. It's a tax that only goes to the favored people of these miners. So, in Bitcoin Unlimited, they specifically put code in there that says if you enact this tax, I'm not going to accept your block. So it makes it so that it will not accept blocks that do implement IFP. Bitcoin ABC has implemented IFP, so in a way, they're destined to split on May 15th if they hold their current course. And if that happens, I think the Chinese miners go with Bitcoin ABC, Amory Sachet, and I would call that maybe like Bitcoin Cash East. And then Roger Ver, Peter Risen, and others will go with the Bitcoin Unlimited client. I think F-Trader, who used to be a developer for Bitcoin ABC, has forked Bitcoin ABC to take out the IFP. So there's even a third client now, and they'll probably be using that. But this would be Bitcoin Cash West, and they would be running their own chain as well. So you got a lot of different parties, but a split looks inevitable at this point, or at the very least, somebody is going to lead this community. I can't see them staying together and everyone saying, "Oh, it's all hunky dory now." There's a lot of bitterness in this community. So that's what seems to be happening.
So for people at home, if you do hold any Bitcoin Cash or you've got it on the exchanges or anything like that, you could see Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Cash tax, let's just call it. And why that really matters is that the node count is going to halve, that therefore the hash rate drops, the more risk of 51% of tax, the community divides, all the network effects that come, it's just not a good situation there. And the final thing I want to mention was BSV and Craig Wright. The bonded courier, we still haven't seen any evidence of all this, and now his newest thing was that Bitcoin Cash, which he helped create, have apparently used his database without his permission, and also claiming that Bitcoin has.
Yeah, he's. I know of no law that says like you can own a database that's public that everyone has seen. But I mean, he makes up stuff that sounds just plausible enough to people that are dumb enough to follow him. So that seems to be his thing. I mean, I get worried about the people that have been brainwashed by BSV. They're just so into BSV that they can't see the obvious scamminess that everyone else that's outside that community can see. And yeah, I can't see this ending well. I'm pretty sure I know what his end game is. He's going to, he's done a bunch of hard forks already. The next hard fork will basically just assign Satoshi's coins on BSV to himself, it'll happen within the next 5 hard forks of BSV. I guarantee it. Some of those people will be like, oh yeah, he is Satoshi, so therefore it belongs to him anyway, and he can't find the key, so he's going to take them. That's what they're going to argue. I don't know how that's going to play out, but this is the man that you're funding, guys. And I guess if they want to be suckered, then I can't stop them. I'm a libertarian, and I wouldn't want to, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a libertarian as well. I'm for free markets. We've got a rule on the channel where we keep an open mind and we try to respect other people's opinions. But whenever I hear that saying it doesn't end well, it reminds me of, did you see the lead flat earther died this week? He's trying to prove the earth was flat and he shot himself up in a rocket and he died. So whenever I hear it doesn't end well, that's the sort of situation I think about.
Yeah, well, I mean, in this case, I could see it with like a mass suicide or something. Like, I don't know if it'll go quite that far, but that's a level of like delusion that a lot of these people are under. It really is kind of cultish. And, I don't know if you've seen that video of Ryan X. Charles saying like Craig S. Wright is Jesus or something like that. But, it's getting very, very close to that level. And, you have to be, if you're willing to suspend reality and rationalize anything and everything so that Craig is, Satoshi, then you're not going to go much. I mean, it's not a much bigger step to like swallow any Kool-Aid that Craig gives you. So,
well, I hope it doesn't go down the mass suicide path, Jimmy. But any final thoughts about Bitcoin before we are going to dive into a little bit of carnivory for people at home?
Well, I think it's been doing great, and I love the recent downturn because it's hurting the altcoins more. I still think that there's been a lot of malinvestment. If you're familiar with Austrian business cycle theory, the downturns are where malinvestments need to die, and I still don't think enough of them have been called. I mean, like, IOTA stopped their blockchain 12 days ago. They're still like somehow in the top 25 coins. That to me is insanity and evidence that the market is very irrational about these sort of things. So I'd like to see all of this stuff just crash before we go on the next bull run, so that we can be cleared of all the junk.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer that 99% needs to get flushed out. I think you're in the 99.99% camp, Jimmy. But I think this is also relevant for the stock market world. I mean, look at the percent of junk market companies, zombie companies we have. We haven't had that natural business cycle because of this easy money. And now we're seeing helicopter money in Hong Kong. So, I mean, stock market is probably just in need of a flush out as the crypto market.
Oh yeah, I mean there's so many sick puppies out there. And like you look at a company like GE, which hasn't done anything in like 20 years, and they still continue to operate because they provide a lot of jobs, and the Fed keeps buying stuff off their like distressed bonds or whatever off their balance sheet. So it's kind of a weird situation because the money printing is being used to prop up malinvestments, and that's more or less what's been happening the last 13 years, going since the 2008 or so. So I can't see this like there's a lot of companies that need to die, that they're being propped up through the Cantillon effect, through like very low interest loans. Remember that interest rates are the rate of monetary expansion that is allowed to you. So if you can get 6% interest, you're allowed a tiny bit of monetary expansion. If you are getting negative rates, then you are allowed a lot of monetary expansion because you're going to borrow as much as you can. So that's what most of these companies have done. They have these giant loans that they don't have to really pay back for a long time, and they're using it to prop themselves up, or like do quote unquote services or something like that. It's crazy to me that most companies in America, at least, like most of them are now services companies, which is another way of saying we're living off of just printed money. Like they're not producing products or goods really. It's like business services or consulting or something like that. Like IBM's a good example. Like they stopped manufacturing any kind of hardware. They do some software, but mostly they make their money off of consulting, which is another way of like basically rent seeking off of other companies that have a lot of money printed for them. So it's Yeah, lots of zombie companies. I wish they would flush out. Perhaps after hyper Bitcoinization that happens, but until then, I think they stick around.
Dan Held and I had a great conversation last week about how the US are trying to prop up the dollar, the bonds, and now Janet Yellen's talking about buying stocks. It's all to save face and to make the financial system look strong. But in Europe, we've already gone down the path of starting to buy junk bonds, corporate bonds. But these other countries that have nothing to lose, that are watching their currency die against the US dollar that has all these privileges, I think it's only a matter of time until they start making the transition. We're already seeing them hoard gold. I think someone's going to be the first to start buying Bitcoin. Once one country hears that one country is buying Bitcoin, that opens the floodgates.
Yeah, I'm certain that there's at least several sovereign wealth funds, which are really extensions of the central bank, that are already buying Bitcoin. I'd be surprised if there wasn't, and the way and they're doing that as a hedge. And I mean, all these countries know that we're under the dollar standard and that there is a dollar hegemony that's basically oppressing their central banks into keeping a strict peg to the dollar, and like the monetary imperialism that the U.S. has imposed on the world, there might be an alternative with Bitcoin. I don't know if we're quite there yet. I think we need to be in the $1 trillion market range before that even becomes a consideration. But at that point, like it can get kind of crazy because there is a nation state, prisoner's dilemma or something like that. If you're the first to do it, then you're going to get all of the benefits. But if you're last to do it, you might get screwed over pretty bad.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive in and let's talk about Carnivory. For those people at home, when I heard about this, I did think it was crazy. So I am pretty passionate about health and with my pharmacy background, and I'm a believer that we should be eating what we ate for thousands of years in the wild, which is meat, natural vegetables, nuts, grains, a bit of fruit when it comes into season and whatnot. And I think so much that's wrong with our health these days is all related to just having too much sugar, bad carbohydrates, this, that, and the other. But when I heard people are living off only meat, I thought, how are they going to get scurvy? Where are they getting their vitamins and minerals from? But if you dive into the biochemistry, there's some interesting things that your body starts to use, different pathways, and people that only eat meat don't actually get scurvy, and there's still a lot of nutrition. So Jimmy, do you want to maybe talk about your thoughts about all this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research into this, and there's an excellent book, I think, written by an anthropologist from, I think, the 1920s or something. It's called Fat of the Land. And essentially, he lived with the Inuit on and off for about a decade. And if you don't know about the Inuit diet, they really only eat meat. Their main sources of meat are caribou, seal, and whale, and some fish. But that's it. They don't pick vegetables. They don't really have any there. It's too cold to grow any. But they are like really healthy, and he documented all of it about how strong they looked, how great teeth they had, and everything else. What's interesting is that as soon as Western food was introduced, you probably, they started getting some health problems, right? Like their teeth were all rotting. Their women had more miscarriages. They had a lot more pain during childbirth. They started getting a lot fatter. Probably the picture in your mind of an Inuit person is kind of a fat old person with like bad teeth, bundled in a lot of clothes. That's actually post-Western food. Before that, they were actually really lean, like strong, like they were killing whales. Come on. So that's the picture that you should have, and that's the picture that you.
It's actually very similar to Aboriginals in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Native populations all over the place, like they were like super strong and very physically fit, and they look kind of like goddesses or gods, right? Like they look really good. So when you talk about like a lot of the modern nutrition theory and all that, a lot of that is honestly because of sort of government interference. The food pyramid was put out in the 70s. There's another book, I forget what the name of it is, but it talks about like all of the manipulation of public information that's gone on the last 50
corporatization as well. Yeah.
Essentially by corporations. It's food companies that were pushing "quote unquote" heart healthy, breakfast, which is all carbs or something like that, and they were blaming cholesterol and fat and things like that for why people were unhealthy. When in fact it was the very stuff that they were producing, which was sugar, carbohydrates, lots of grains, and things like that that humans weren't that used to eating. But to get back to the carnivory stuff, I was actually a vegetarian for about 20 years, and I only really started on meat 7 years ago, and that was I started as a paleo person, so I ate everything except refined foods, and anything with preservatives or additives that I didn't know anything about. And I think most people agree, sugar is probably bad for you, bread's probably bad for you. Some weird chemical that no one's heard of that's used to preserve, your Skittles or something like that. That's probably bad for you. So most people are on board with the paleo diet. After doing the paleo diet for a few years, I discovered something about fruit, and it's that fruit has been bred more or less over the last 10,000 years to be sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. So an apple that you find in the wild is pretty tiny. It's about this big. They're called crab apples, if you've ever seen them. An apple in the grocery store is like this big. The interesting thing is the seed sizes are the same. They just got bred to be more fleshier over the last 10,000 years. So you can think of farmers as sort of like the Monsanto of yesteryear. They're the ones that bred it to be very high in fructose and so on. So it's unnaturally sweet, and every fruit suffers from this. Every single one has been bred to be sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. So in that sense, you get way too many carbs as a result of eating fruit. So if you eliminate fruit, then you're pretty much on the keto diet, which is lots of animal products like animal fat, lots of eggs, lots of protein and fat, but also some vegetables. The thing about vegetables that you learn as you do the keto diet is that it's not actually that beneficial, and it actually doesn't add very many calories. And this was true of our ancestors as well. You could kill a megafauna and get 10,000 calories in a day if you wanted to. You collect berries, you're gonna get like 500, right? Like which is the better payoff? Most people, most people back then, they preferred meat, and it was only in times of real, like when they didn't have anything, that they would go and pick berries or eat vegetables or something like that. So, in a sense, like a lot of vegetables have also been manipulated, and the big lie about vegetables is that you need fiber in some way, shape, or form. The thing is, like your body doesn't know how to use fiber. That's why it goes through you so quickly. And in order to use fiber as energy, you need a completely different biological system. And a good example is a cow. A cow can process fiber into energy, but a cow also chews for 18 hours a day and has 4 stomachs. We only have 1 stomach. We also don't chew that much. So as a result, we can't process it, and it just goes straight through us. So we don't really need it. It's not something that our bodies need. So if you eliminate vegetables, you're pretty much at the carnivory diet, and it's a method of eliminating the things that are bad for you that you get to carnivory, not as a result of, oh, I love meat so much. You eliminate one thing at a time, and then you get to this. There are more extreme paleo or carnivore people that also eliminate dairy and cheese and things like that. And there are other people that allow for that. Usually eggs are allowed, and you eat lots of meat, and that tends to work pretty well for a lot of people. And it certainly worked very well for me. I feel much stronger. I have a lot more energy. My mood is a lot more consistent, and so on.
Yeah, for people at home, I guess 2 facts I'd tell them to go down the rabbit hole and just open their mind up is that the people with the strongest bones in the world don't have any dairy foods, and there's people like the Inuits and the Eskimos and that only live off basically fat and blubber and meat, and they've got very, very healthy hearts, low blood pressure, no diabetes, all those things that we're told that fat is bad for you for. So, look, Jimmy, I am a fan of vegetables. We're pretty lucky down here in Tassie with our organic farmers markets, but we've also got the best grass-fed beef and steaks in the world. So next time you're in Australia, you'll have to come down to Tassie.
Yeah, and something about that grass-fed beef down in Australia. Oh my goodness, it is just so delicious. There's a satisfaction that that I don't think like sort of manufactured cows that we have in the U.S. Quite satisfied to the same degree. So yeah, looking forward to it, man.
Awesome. So that's been a great chat. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one at home. Thanks for taking the time, Jimmy, and we'll have to catch up again in the future.
Will do. I enjoyed it. Fiat delenda est.
Cheers, guys.